So I've been sort of dithering all summer trying to decide how to launch this channel. It's going to deal with complex texts, mostly Shakespeare, and what I see as our urgent human drive to find meaning by way of rich storytelling. And I want to offer ways to work deeply and think deeply about those texts and talk about how we can benefit from that work. So naturally, my first video is going to be about Star Wars. Hear me out. I was at the twilight of sleep the other night, thinking about The Empire Strikes Back, like you do. In particular, this moment in the plot as our heroes flee Hoth. Warning, this video is chock full of spoilers for a movie that was released 45 years ago. Ouch. So, Luke has lost his gunner and maybe half his squadron trying to cover the rebels' retreat. He did manage to one-shot an Imperial walker all by himself with no small degree of panache, so good on him. He clambers into his trusty X-Wing, and R2-D2 is fretting at him in the astromech, and they blast off and away from Hoth, and meeting zero Imperial resistance. Luke even has time for a bit of banter with R2, kind of nonchalantly telling the little guy he's going to be deserting his post to go off on a vision quest. I mean, think about it. And then we cut to Han, Leia, and the rest of the gang on the Millennium Falcon, and the Imperials are all over them like bedbugs at a one-star motel. Basically, they spend the rest of the movie running away from them, just trying to get away. So, despite my Amish heritage and my everyday struggle to exist in the contemporary world, I spend some time online watching video content about popular entertainment and storytelling. And I have seen a number of videos describing this discrepancy as a plot hole. Now, there are a number of ways you can approach an alleged plot hole, whether you're a casual viewer or a fan or a critic. You can just shrug, say, meh, I don't care, keep on shoveling popcorn in your face hole and enjoy the movie. You can get into the nerdy weeds and think about the problem in technical terms. What would a planetary blockade look like? How many ships are involved? How far from the base is the rendezvous point? Yada, yada. Tip of the hat, by the way, to folks like Generation Tech, Eckhart's Ladder, all those guys. None of this is a dig on you. Keep up the good work. Alternatively, you can just snark about it and get some clicks. Or you can try looking beyond the surface level and try to figure out what is happening at the heart of the story. Maybe you won't find anything beyond the realization that writers make mistakes, or they use cheats and shortcuts and distract us like sleight of hand artists, hoping we won't notice. But maybe you'll discover there is an additional layer of meaning embedded in the work, something you hadn't noticed, something that suggests complexity and depth. A tremor in the force, if you will. So thinking about the escape from Hoth, the question that my brain decided was more important than sleep was, why wasn't Vader specifically pursuing Luke? Because, friends, he's not even after Luke at this point in the story. No, not immediately, anyway. I mean, the crawl says, yes, he's obsessed with finding young Skywalker, but in actuality, he is specifically targeting the Millennium Falcon and its crew with such cold, single-minded focus that he follows them into a totally scientifically accurate asteroid field with star destroyers and doesn't even blink when one of them is murked by a rock the size of Yankee Stadium. I assume he didn't blink the helmet. But wait, why is he after the Falcon? It becomes clear, at least to me, over the course of the action, that he never thought Luke was on board. So he's trying to use them as bait, as Leia says later, but why go through this elaborate, wasteful plan that depends on any number of coincidences and or small miracles to actually work? I said and or. Well, first of all, for audiences in 1980, when this came out, this film introduces us to the notion of precognition through the Force. No, you don't need to read the novelization or the comic books or anything to find that out. It's never explicitly mentioned in terms of Vader's plan, but Yoda explains the mechanics of it later on. Always in motion is the future. And Kasdan and Lucas trust us to connect the dots. Back when Lucas trusted us to do that. Anyway, but that's just the mechanic. More importantly to me, you have to ask, what is Vader trying to accomplish? If his primary goal is simply to capture Luke and take him to the Emperor, I would argue he could have accomplished that pretty easily on Hoth. But no, he wants Luke to get some training and build up a little bit of confidence, and then try to come and rescue his friends. If this were merely a trap intended to capture Luke, of course I agree it would make no sense. But I ask myself, how would it benefit Vader to simply capture Luke and deliver him in shackles to the Emperor? It wouldn't really. Best case scenario, he gets a clammy, I mean like cold, rotted fish, clammy pat on his helmeted head. You want this, don't you? And his son is either dead or brainwashed by way of extensive torture into being some kind of inquisitor, or worst case, the Emperor kills Vader and replaces him with Luke after brainwashing by way of extensive torture. Sidebar, I'll come back later to the idea that Star Wars is made for 10-year-olds, but how many other pieces of children's entertainment go to torture like Star Wars? A New Hope, Empire, Jedi, Clone Wars, Rebels. I mean, it is a feature of the franchise. And Han's line in Empire always breaks me. They never even ask me any questions. Anyway, Vader lures Luke into playing the hero by brutalizing his friends. He exploits his son's attachments to his loved ones and uses those attachments and his pride, his sense of himself as the heroic center of this story, to entice him into an unnecessary fight. He uses that fight to test his son's worthiness, to push him beyond his boundaries, and to goad him into striking in anger and fear, contrary to Jedi training. And then, when Luke is broken, Vader offers him a path forward, one that will result in the restoration of order through an overthrow of the current regime. Do you see where this is going? Vader is manipulating his son to play out the drama of his own life. Perhaps if you have direct or indirect experience of generational trauma and or narcissistic parents, the bells are going off in your head the way they clanged away at mine in the middle of the night. All of this is to say, I think many of us have become accustomed to thinking of stories primarily in terms of plot. There's something transactional about it. Or to the extent that a story leans into theme, we expect a character to actually utter the words like the abstract of a paper. Something like, I don't know, failure is the greatest teacher. It's deep. The Empire Strikes Back is an action movie that is not driven by plot. It's driven by the strange, whirling complexity of relationships and identity. That moment in your life when you feel like you've been doing well, you've overcome your demons, you are the master of your fate, and actually you're just playing out another reenactment of your childhood trauma for the 10,000th time. When the characters in the film have dialogue that either directly addresses this theme or kind of circles around the edges of the insecurities and instabilities of growing up, of maturing, of finding out that things aren't what you thought they were or what they should be when you were younger. I don't trust him either, but he is my friend. That is why you fail. Yeah, you're a real hero. Turn around, you woolly. Maybe not that last one. Or they abstract the theme. That's Yoda driving into a deeper, almost dreamlike space. Always in motion is the future. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. As the Ewoks say, that guy's wise. Or they speak to the terrible aftermath. Listen, Mark Hamill's performance in this film is underrated. I will fight you when he says, "Ben, why didn't you tell me?" My heart breaks every single time, and I've seen this movie literally 100 times. Now, I'm not saying that this interpretation that came to me in the middle of the night is the correct one or should be considered canon. In fact, I hate the whole idea of canon. We don't need Jedi fundamentalism. I'm also not presuming that the writers necessarily planned or even consciously intended this layer of meaning. Maybe they did, but a story written with love and care, one that expresses not some didactic point, but communicates a sense of questioning, of restlessness, of yearning, will tend to support multiple valid interpretations. I'm thinking of J.R.R. Tolkien's rejection of allegory in storytelling in favor of the idea of applicability. Not that guy in the undergrad writing workshop who always says, the ambiguity was intentional. And yes, it's always a guy. So, how does this connect to my Shakespeare propaganda? If we accept Hamlet's analogy of drama as art holding a looking glass up to nature, then I think we should take that task seriously. And I don't believe he's talking about mere imitation. We use mirrors to examine, to illuminate, to magnify. We must be the teenager looking for the blemish that they are sure will damn them to social exile. The point of the looking glass is not to comfort or affirm, but to reveal. Now, many people think Star Wars is just a silly pastiche made for 10-year-old boys. Lucas himself has said so, often a little defensively. Love you, George. Longtime fan. Look forward to chatting with you. And look, again, if that's how one prefers to enjoy those films, then I'm not here to rain on your parade. Others seem to think that it's some kind of broken cultural artifact that needs renovation. And they go about that clearly having understood little beyond the bare surface of the original trilogy, or worse, having passively absorbed a bunch of stereotypes about the films. And yeah, I'm definitely talking about Shakespeare now. Now. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who think that Shakespeare is not in need of saving. Yeah, the plays are being cut from curricula here and there, but there are festivals and Shakespeare in the Park, and of course there's the RSC and the Globe and the National in the UK, and obscenely priced celebrity Broadway productions. But listen, deep down, a lot of these folks think Shakespeare is bullshit. The same way critics snark about the fortune cookie wisdom that Yoda offers in Empire. They point out the playwright's ineptitude with matters of time and space, the absurd leaps and coincidences in the plot, or the quibbles and dramatic conventions that don't land for a contemporary audience. They don't know what to do with the language, so they try to get clever with concept or spectacle, or these days they just kind of go vaguely modern and put guns and cell phones in their productions. I think that will do something. Or they think the text is very important but can't really articulate why. Maybe pay lip service to its universality or the beauty of the language or the themes. Previously, we had generations of performers who were so in love with the sound of the language that they couldn't embrace the jaggedness and the roughness and the horror and the dick jokes. So much so that we had Victorian adaptations that were so appalled by the content of these plays that they edited them to their liking. Romeo and Juliet live happily ever after. Othello is interrupted just before he murders Desdemona, so she lives happily ever after with Cassio? It's true, look it up. And look, there were those who believe these plays shouldn't be performed at all anymore because they were written by a sexist, racist white man who was complicit in the project of empire. I wouldn't be making this video if I entirely agreed, but I do take that argument seriously. But that's for a whole other video. What I'm getting at is I think Just as Star Wars awakened my 7-year-old self to the luminosity of being. I mean, think about that. Working deeply with Shakespeare's plays and other complex poetic texts can give us deepened access to our inner lives in ways that can shock, appall, and enlighten us and our audiences. But only if we treat them with the sort of seriousness in play that I shared with every other second grader who was simultaneously thrilled and traumatized to learn that Vader was Luke's father. It is a choice to accept that something which doesn't immediately make sense to us in a story is merely a plot hole, or a faded, meaningless convention, or some other failing of the storyteller. And I'm not suggesting that every writer or every story deserves our benefit of the doubt. But sometimes looking closer, searching not for the right answer, but for the toughest questions, will lead us to richness of meaning that we could not have anticipated. Several years ago, I was directing a young actor who was struggling with an extremely challenging role. It was the narrator in The Telltale Heart, which is a banger of a short story, and it really works on stage if it's adapted well. I saw him struggling, and I told him to remember that moment of struggle and cherish it. Yes, there are parts that basically feel like a version of ourselves just put into a novel situation. And some actors make whole careers playing those parts, and that's fine, I guess. But sometimes you land a role and you realize you will have to expand into it. And I'm not just talking about the technical challenge or the stamina required. I mean the attempt to inhabit, channel, and illuminate this character actually demands that you expand your conception of yourself. And I would argue that nearly every Shakespeare play, even the bad ones, and there are bad ones, has parts like that. But only if we accept the challenge. So, in the series to follow, I'm going to talk about how I think we tend to miss the mark in teaching and performing these plays. And to be clear, I'm not interested in punching down at actors. I want to support and uplift and encourage and hopefully offer tools that can help us to dig a little bit deeper into these plays and find some of these hidden gold that I think exists there, both in the plays and within ourselves through the act of unearthing them. And I'll talk about how some of our prejudices, past and present, enforce that missing of the mark, and how I think we can use these plays, as well as other rich, confounding, radical texts, to explore the unknown regions of our inner lives. Because, friends, in these times, the integrity of our inner lives is a precious commodity. Please, all the things: like, subscribe, comment, share. You don't have to smash anything. We're pacifists here. And check out my website. It's in the doobly-doo below if you're interested in workshops or coaching either in person in New York City or online. Thanks for visiting. This channel is in its infancy, and I appreciate your watching, and I appreciate all your support. May the force be with you.